Hi everyone, this is my therapist interview and reflection presentation. So for my interview, I interviewed Dr. N. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and she's also a registered art therapist. She has her doctorate in psychology in marriage and family therapy. She owns a private practice and she does provide virtual therapy to clients across California. This allows her to reach a diverse range of clients across California, but she also does offer in-person therapy in the Los Angeles area. In her private practice, she does focus on creating an engaging and supportive therapeutic experience for her clients. So Dr. N's clinical experience includes working with concerns such as anxiety, depression, trauma, burnout, and perfectionism, as well as relationship changes. She also has a particular interest in supporting young adults and helping professionals who often prioritize others over themselves. And she also has an interest in parents who may feel overwhelmed or stretched thin. Um, she also does include couples and family therapy services in her practice. In that, she does explore dynamics. She helps build strategies for relationship building and foster communication skills, and also fostering authentic connection between her clients and in couples and family therapy. In her practice, she said that she emphasizes a collaborative client-centered approach where her clients are active participants in their therapy. Her therapeutic approach is grounded in non-blaming systemic perspectives, meaning that she looks at patterns within the relationships rather than placing fault on the individual. She also integrates evidence-based practices with creative approaches, including mindfulness and art therapy. She also emphasizes practical skill building, so clients leave sessions with tools that they can apply in their daily lives. And overall, her style is collaborative and honest. And she also mentioned that she does like to incorporate humor when appropriate. Dr. N also brings a strong cultural perspective to her work. She practices cultural humility with an anti-oppressive lens, especially in cultures where there's a negative stigma surrounding mental health. She says she pays close attention to factors like intergenerational expectations, identity, and spirituality. And her work is grounded in cultural humility and an anti-oppressive framework, ensuring that her clients' backgrounds and experiences are respected and integrated into the therapeutic process. So initially, when I approached Dr. N as my interviewee, I did actually think she had experience in psychedelic assisted therapy, but it does seem that there was some miscommunication in our messages before the actual interview. So even though she doesn't have hands-on experience with PAP, I do think that it was really interesting to hear her perspective and viewpoints regarding PAP and what her views are on that. And I also did really like her approach to therapy, and it really does align with many of my interests in therapy. I was especially drawn to how she integrates both evidence-based practices and creative methods like art therapy. I also appreciated her emphasis on culturally responsive care and her focus on providing practical tools for clients. Overall, her holistic and collaborative approach to therapy really intrigued me, and I think overall it was a really great conversation, and I'm really glad that I was able to learn a lot from her. So with that said, my first takeaway from this interview was that she was really interested in possibly there being a combination of PAP and art therapy. She did say that she saw potential where that could be a combination, and it could create a powerful multimodal approach to mental health. So my second takeaway was that she did say that she feels that more research is needed. She does have an interest in the field, but she feels like more research needs to be done. And she does have interest in potentially integrating psychedelic assisted psychotherapy into her own practice in the future. But she did say a lot of that would just be based on the new research that comes out regarding PAP. So my third takeaway from this interview was that there was an emphasis on safety considerations regarding PAP. She emphasized that the importance of safety, consent, and pacing in PAP was essential to that, and that she believes it's important to create a safe and collaborative environment, and that integration should happen at the client's pace with continuous check-ins to ensure that the process feels grounded rather than overwhelming. The fourth takeaway from this interview was that, and to me this was the biggest takeaway I would say, was that there was an emphasis on cultural consideration. She emphasized that we need to critically consider the cultural and ethical implications of psychedelic assisted therapy, and that this includes how indigenous knowledge and sacred practices are translated into Western clinical settings that prioritize individual outcomes, and how it is important to be aware of that in order to avoid cultural appropriation. Which then leads to my fifth takeaway, where we do need to discuss ethical considerations when discussing PAP. She said that we need to critically examine the ethics of profiting from psychedelic assisted therapy. And she said that there is an imbalance where Western markets monetize these practices, while many indigenous communities often face restricted or limited access to their own traditional healing medicines, whether that's through legislation or just access in general to care. So she did emphasize that it was important to take these factors into consideration when implementing PAP into our therapeutic practice. In our interview, we did also discuss Dr. N's diverse clinical and professional background and career path. It does span multiple levels of care, including community mental health, schools, hospitals, and her private practice. She did start practicing in 2016, and she currently holds advanced training as both a licensed marriage and family therapist and a registered art therapist, along with a doctoral degree in marriage and family therapy. Um, in addition to her clinical work, she also plays a strong role in training and mentoring future therapists as a core faculty member and an AAMFT approved supervisor. She also founded Artful Psych, which integrates psychology and creative expression through workshops and media to make mental health more accessible. And overall, her career just reflects a strong integration of clinical practice, education, and creative outreach. So, Dr. N's ethical stance is grounded in cultural humility, collaboration, and a non blaming systemic perspective. She prioritizes safety, consent, and working at the client's pace, while also integrating both evidence based practices and creative approaches like art therapy. Her cultural background as a person of color and her experience growing up in California also contribute to her awareness of how identity, migration, and cultural stigma shape mental health experiences. Um, and she's also especially attentive to how therapy must be adapted to each individual's experience. And then she also, in regards to psychedelic assisted therapy, states that she is interested in this area of study and the future research and implementation of it. But she does believe that more research needs to be done, and that it's also really essential and important to understand the roots, history, and cultural aspects of psychedelic assisted therapy. So this interview definitely influenced my perspectives and professional goals. Overall, it influenced my perspective by reinforcing the importance of collaboration in therapy. I was especially reminded that clients should be active participants in the process rather than just passive recipients of treatment. And I think this can actually really apply to PAP as well. It's always important to make sure um, that the clients are also involved and collaborating with you, especially if um, they are participating in PAP. And professionally, it also just increased my interest in incorporating more creative modalities like art or mindfulness into my future work as a therapist. It also helped clarify my goal of becoming a therapist that can bring balance while also being structured and intentional. I think it taught me that it's important that I could also remain flexible and responsive to each client's needs by doing this. Now, in regards to my concerns and critical reflections on the field itself, one concern that came up for me relates to the accessibility, especially in emerging fields like psychedelic assisted therapy. I think these treatments are often very expensive and they're very limited in availability, which raises questions about who actually has access to them. Um, and then I also developed more awareness of ethical issues, particularly around the cultural appropriation and commercialization of practices that have Indigenous roots. This connects me also to the importance of the cultural competence and humility and how these therapies are developed and implemented. And then another concern that I had was the gap between research and real world access. So that even though something is evidence based, it doesn't always mean it's accessible or equally distributed, which this highlights to me the importance of making sure that ethical considerations keep pace with scientific advancements, and overall just making sure that the ongoing gap between research and that we address the ongoing gap between research and real world access and affordability. So some key learning points from this interview for me center around the idea that effective therapy often involves a balance of structure, creativity, and emotional safety. And also another major takeaway that I had from this was that was how much cultural identity and lived experience influence how clients make meaning of their experiences. So I really appreciated that Dr. N emphasized this, and she emphasized on providing practical, usable tools that clients can apply outside of sessions. And finally, this interview reinforced that ethical practice has to take context, history, and access into account, and not just the clinical effectiveness of the therapeutic intervention, but all those other factors into account. So for future applications, application in clinical or research work, going forward, I do see myself incorporating more creative and experiential interventions into my clinical work as a therapist in the future. Um, this would probably include things like mindfulness or expressive activities when appropriate. This interview also reinforced the importance of maintaining a culturally responsive and systemic approach in therapy, and also being mindful of each client's unique background and context. And in addition, I am also just more aware of the need to advocate for accessibility and ethical practice, especially in emerging areas like psychedelic assisted therapy. And overall, this experience has just encouraged me to explore more holistic and integrative approaches, both in future clinical practice and also in potential research. So, overall, I learned a lot from this interview, and I hope to learn more going forward. So, with that said, though, I do also want to mention what surprised and challenged me the most from this interview was learning about the ethical complexities surrounding psychedelic assisted therapy, specifically in Western medicine. Um, I know we did discuss this in class, but it was really interesting just to hear it from um, a practicing therapist perspective, and I just became more aware of the concerns related to cultural appropriation, particularly how indigenous knowledge systems and traditional practices just have been historically extracted and repackaged within a Western clinical lens and commercial context. So I think that was really interesting to hear from Dr. N, and we did actually talk about that subject quite a bit in our interview. And then we also just kind of touched on, the commodification of what are often like sacred traditions, and how in many Western frameworks, psychedelics are being like studied and applied primarily through more of an individualized clinical lens, or like on measurable outcomes instead of the more collective indigenous roots, and in the indigenous culture where they're traditionally used more in like communal, spiritual, or ceremonial ways. So it was just a really interesting conversation to have regarding that. um, and then this contrast also challenged me to think more critically about how mental health innovations are developed and who they are ultimately benefiting, as well as also just the importance of honoring the cultural origins in these emerging therapeutic practices. So yeah, overall, I had a really great time interviewing Dr. N, and I learned a lot. And once again, I just continue to hope learning. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.